John, do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at a close of day. Rage against the dying of the light. Today we are going over Christopher Nolan's 2014 sci-fi classic, Interstellar. My name is Nicholas Lydon, and I am with my co-host today, John McKittrick. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm John McKittrick, and that was a great intro, Nick.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
that.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Before we get into everything, John, I wanted to hear about some of the movies you watched recently. It's been a couple weeks since we've done one of these.
I know. Yeah, I'll give you my last four here. So, at number 4, Robin Hood, Ridley Scott movie. Not great.
Oh, is this the new one?
No, it's old, like 2011, I think.
Okay. Oh, yeah, but new-ish. Yeah.
Yes, but it's like not what I expected at all. Like it's not a Robin Hood story. It's like an origin story. So he's not like stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. He's like a guy who's like gonna be the guy who steals from the rich and gives to the poor. And
this is with Russell Crowe, right?
Yeah. It's like Gladiator, but his name's Robin Hood. Like he's like leading the army, and it's not great.
It's funny you say that because I saw the poster for it when you reviewed it, and I was like, "Oh, he even has the Gladiator haircut. It's right there."
Yeah, it's not good. Then I watched The Dirty Dozen. It's a Robert Aldrich classic. It's all-star cast. It's just like one of those legendary like team movies, you know, like a team of cool guys movies, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So Charles Bronson and like Lee Marvin, and that's a cool one. Actually, Donald Sutherland too, which was surprised to me. He's in it too.
But you're not even saying what it's about, though.
Oh well, they like okay. I'll give you the rundown. So what it is like Lee Marvin gets sent on this. He doesn't know like what the mission is going to be. They're like, hey, we need you. He's like some like corporal in the army, and they're like, hey, we need you for this special mission. You got to get 12 guys who are put on death row, and like lead them into this like secret mission. And like the guys is like a cast of characters who are like about to get executed, and he has to like turn them into like a well-functioning team that can like execute this mission. And it's set in like World War II. And yeah, it's pretty good. It's just like a good like teamwork movie, you know.
Does it have some sports vibes to it almost?
Sure, yeah. There's some training, some climbing ropes, and yeah, it's got that.
Nice.
Yeah. Number 3, yeah. Or I was going. Actually, no, I'm going down. So number 2, Snake Eyes, De Palma movie, Nick Cage. I'm just going through De Palma, so it was next on the list. It was pretty good. And then watched last night, Nosferatu, but the 1979 version, Werner Herzog version. I've never seen a Werner Herzog movie. So I've
heard good things about that version. What did you think?
I did like it. It's very like artistic. Like it's kind of like it reminds me of Kubrick, where every shot could be a painting kind of thing, you know. But it's like a straight remake of the 1922 Nosferatu silent movie. And obviously I want to see that one too before the big one coming out this year from our boy Robert Eggers.
I'm so deeply excited for Nosferatu this year. It's definitely the number one I'm looking forward to. My watches in the past 2 weeks, I've actually watched 9 movies since we did the last pod.
Okay.
Brought to you by Thanksgiving break. Yeah. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but just to run through it, I rewatched Goodfellas, The Lighthouse, Our Little Secret, which is an absolute trash Lindsay Lohan Christmas movie that just came out, but she's back. Trainwreck, which I had never seen before, with Amy Schumer, and I didn't really care for it. I mean, I really love Bill Hader, but just the narrative wasn't there. But it is the craziest part about that movie is that LeBron James was a superstar when it came out, and he is still equally as relevant now.
Does he play LeBron James in that, or is he like?
Yeah, he's LeBron
Kevin?
James in that movie.
Oh, okay.
No, that he cannot play anyone besides LeBron James. He is just like it's like if you had like Jake Sully from Avatar in his Avatar version in a movie. That can only be an Avatar. Like he is an otherworldly being. But
yeah.
And then Four Christmases, which is actually a banger. That's the Reese Witherspoon, Vince Vaughn Christmas classic, which is a good, bad Christmas movie. And then I saw Moana 2, which is going to make $14 billion.
I saw that also.
I saw Just Go With It, which was an Adam Sandler Hawaii movie.
I've seen
Shocker.
that. Yeah, I've seen that.
And then I saw Krampus, which is Adam Scott. It's like a black comedy horror movie. Do you remember this? Did you ever see it?
No, I never saw it, but I know of it.
It's not terribly good. I will say it has like some really good monster design though. Like way better than this movie should have. So I was pleasantly surprised by that. And a cool ending. But the one movie in particular I do want to bring up is I watched Perfect Days, which came out at the, I believe, end of last year. It came out in 2023. They shot it in 17 days in Japan. It basically follows a toilet cleaner that lives in, I believe, Tokyo, but certainly in Japan. And it's really just about like his day-to-day life and how simply he lives, but it's on his own terms. And I think really more than anything, what I found really powerful about it is it's really about the power of like perspective and how you can be happy anywhere. You can free yourself emotionally and spiritually anywhere if you have like the strength and willingness and determination to do so. And in a way, it's just as much like a daily undertaking and task as physical therapy would be. But it has a great soundtrack, and I would definitely recommend it to everyone. So we'll talk about this at some point once you get a chance to watch.
Yeah, I want to see that. I think it's on Hulu too. But yeah, I've heard good things about that. Cool. Yeah, I mean, do you want to start with the impact on you? Interstellar, impact on you?
Yeah, so I saw this movie in theaters when it came out. It was my freshman year of college. In college, we've said this before, but I remember I kind of fell off the wagon of watching a lot of movies. Like high school, I was deep into it. And this was kind of like one of the last movies I think I saw in theaters for a little bit. And it definitely blew me away. Like I absolutely loved it. Do remember walking out of the theater and just being like in bliss from like how much I loved the story and the experience of it. And one of my friends immediately was like, I just don't think the science makes sense. And I was like, first of all, shut the fuck up, as if you know. But second of all, even if it is incorrect, I think you're missing the point of an experience like this and a movie like this. Like, I think it can be about more than just like, how does the math add up and like the theory. And actually we'll talk about it in a little bit, but like theory was a huge part of this. So it's not like they went into it and they were just like, we're going to do whatever we want for the sake of this movie. But anyway, I loved this movie when I saw it. I think I might have watched it once since, like years ago, but I had not seen it certainly in a long time. So I just watched it again in an IMAX screening this past weekend, and it blew me away. We'll get into the details, but just suffice it to say that I think I love it more now than I have ever loved it in the past.
Well, my whole case for why it's not good was that the science didn't make sense. No, I'm just kidding. No, we'll talk more about the science later. But yeah, I remember people having that reaction. I had a bit of a different experience with it, and actually, but it's part of why I was excited to revisit it. So it was definitely the Nolan movie that I like hadn't seen most recently. All his other movies I've watched again, since like this was the last one on my Nolan list of like I need to revisit that one. But I do remember I saw it when it came out in theaters. I think I was either a junior or senior in high school. And it didn't have a big impact on me. I saw it. I remember going, yeah, that was cool. Like, but not like any of those scenes really stuck with me the way some of his other movies were. I mean, other movies did. I mean, just to think of it in contrast with like Inception, I remember, and that came out in 2010, so 4 years earlier. I remember like talking about that movie with my friend, like sitting in his like in the room he had his computer in, and like reading about it and like debating what does that last scene mean? Like, is he like with when the turn top thing is like, oh, is it gonna fall or whatever? Like, I remember really caring about Inception and like not really caring much about this movie. I remember I liked it. Like, I wasn't one of those people saying, oh, that was bad, but it was just like, oh yeah, okay, like that was cool. And since then, like I've realized like, oh wow, people love this movie. And like Letterboxd, obviously it's a big hit there, and we'll talk about some of the stats on Letterboxd. But it made me really want to like understand why people love it, and not to be like the one who doesn't. I don't want to be the one guy who doesn't like what people think is Nolan's best movie. I was excited to come back to it and see, okay, why is this like 4.4? This is Nolan's magnum opus, So I'm excited to talk about it with you today for sure.
Yeah, well, and I guess I think the Inception point is a good one too, because I remember. I mean, that was a huge movie when it came out. It was huge, huge, and I think it definitely like even the way that it's written and the way it ended definitely like motivated people to talk a lot about it.
True.
Like I think in some ways the Interstellar story is a little bit more, it comes to a conclusion. There is an end to it. So in some ways it doesn't have some of that like sticky, almost internet like reaction-y thing that Inception did really well and even got parodied for because it was, you know, too
True.
convoluted, people were saying. But I'm curious what you have to say about sci-fi, because I think I'm having to come to grips with the fact that sci-fi probably just is my favorite genre. Like, I think bad sci-fi is amongst the worst movies ever made, but like when it does work, I think it allows itself to be some of the best. Like it's a very low floor, very high ceiling genre, and I love what it does for providing directors, writers, and artists with like a really open um, playground to build within. That it's just built within the packaging of it that people are going and to an extent be willing to um oh gosh, I'm forgetting what the phrase is, but you know, take a step back from what reality is and be open-minded about these things. So anyways, I love sci-fi. I'm a huge fan of it. What has your relationship been like with it?
Oh yeah, I mean, like some of the first movies I was ever into were Star Wars, right? Like that was like the one of the first like franchises I was just obsessed with, you know, with the action figures and getting lightsabers and dressing up as Luke Skywalker for Halloween last year. No, like as a
Nice.
kid. And I had a Yoda mask, and you know, like so I love sci-fi. I always loved sci-fi, and maybe this was just like the time I saw it, you know, going into college, you know, last year of high school. Maybe I just wasn't as into it. But I mean, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here is like, you know, when we get to it of like, now coming back, looking at it objectively, obviously being a big sci-fi fan, but trying to look at these movies as where they sit in totality of the sci-fi genre. Why is this one like the top for a lot of people? And is it that for me? And that's really what I was
Hmm.
trying to figure out.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll definitely get into like the why, like the highs, the lows, what I do
Yeah.
love about it. Before we get into the movie history, though, I was going to ask the question of, do you think Hollywood is missing this type of movie today?
Yeah, I don't think so. Well, maybe as a one-off, yeah, I think so. Like, cause I can't think of others. I mean, Dune is going to be another franchise, and I mean, I think that there was Arrival. I guess that was like 10 years ago or something.
Arrival
Uh,
is what I thought of as well. That
yeah,
definitely seems the biggest comp.
yeah. So maybe. I mean, missing like space movies, maybe not. I mean, we had The Martian and Gravity and
Hmm.
some really good space movies. But like a sci-fi, you know, thriller action with a lot of like real science in it. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you could compare that to. I mean, the first one is, or maybe it's not the first, but you know, an inspiration for a lot of these is 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that's the one that this reminds me most of. So I do
Hmm.
like it when I think about that. And do we have we had anything like that since then, other than Arrival? I don't know.
Yeah, it definitely feels like, I mean, it's sci-fi, right? But I agree to your point, to that question of like, are we missing this type of movie? I think if you're asking, are we missing sci-fi? The answer is no,
Hmm.
because I mean, even looking at the box office for this year, Dune 2, it's made 714 million. It's the second highest grossing film of the year, not including children's movies.
Hmm.
And then the number one grossing movie would be Deadpool and Wolverine, which is arguably sci-fi as well, right? But I
Sure.
think the like to the question of is it missing this type of movie? It's like I think this is a niche within sci-fi, which is a grounded sci-fi. Like it's somewhere that's like between the Star Wars and the Dunes and like actually what we are capable of today. Like it's a lot more tangible for what we can do and actually envision. Um, and so I do think we're missing a little bit of that. I think it's a good point what you were just talking about a second ago of like Arrival was the comp I thought of first, but certainly Gravity, and you mentioned one other, but
Martian.
yeah, The Martian. There was really a steady stream of those about 10 years ago. I kind of wonder why they stopped, because all those movies were pretty successful.
Well, here's I think what a key difference in some of those is that like a movie like this, an undertaking like this, requires like a real visionary director, like Nolan, like Kubrick, like Denny. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, The Martian is Ridley Scott, and it's a cool space movie, but he's not a visionary in the same way. You know, like in my mind, at least.
Ridley Scott isn't.
I don't know.
Hot take, John McKittrick. You're
I don't.
talking about the
Well,
director of Alien, Blade Runner, and Gladiator over
Well,
here.
actually, I mean that's a good thing to break down, and maybe I'm wrong, you know. But is Alien this vision? I guess it was in 1979, and he's pulling in all the the stuff from Geiger, but I don't see the Martian as like this like visionary project. It's about a guy who gets stranded in
Yeah.
space, and he has to grow crops to survive. Right? It's much
Well, I
more
think a
like
lot of that stems from the source material on that,
yeah,
though, too,
yeah,
because that
and
book is very honestly what Scott did with it was like I think he built a little bit upon it. The book itself is almost a beach read as far as like as I mean, as much as you would think it's like a very technical sci-fi aerospace thing, it's very much like about this dude farming in a hut essentially.
Yeah, but I guess I like the difference there, and yeah, I'm not saying Ridley Scott's not a visionary now that I think about it, but like it takes a guy with big ideas like a Kubrick, Denny, and Nolan to put something like this to screen and like be confident that they can like take this risk. And I don't think other like directors are taking that risk right now. I don't know who else would be the one to do it, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Ridley's gonna come out and make another movie like this. You know, like I just don't see it.
Yeah, well, I mean, either way, I definitely don't think we have that cutaway of the sci-fi genre very frequently currently, but hopefully that changes in the future.
Yeah.
As to the production of it, it was originally the idea came from the theoretical physicist Kip Thorne, who had the idea of the most exotic events in the universe suddenly becoming accessible to humans. And sort of an interesting story, he met the producer Linda Obst, after being set up on a blind date with her by Carl Sagan back in I think like the 80s or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so they I think just remained friends, but after that he started to like develop this story, and he spoke with her about it around like 2005 2006, and they started to actually from there like create a more cohesive idea of what will this look like. Spielberg was supposed to originally direct it, but that didn't end up working out, and so they reached out to Christopher Nolan about it, and then Jonathan Nolan, Christopher Nolan's brother, actually wrote out the original script for it, and the two of them worked together to create the final product. John, any other interesting production tidbits that I missed?
Yeah, and no, you hit them all, but just to add some color to one of them. So just kind of some of the interesting like inner workings of Hollywood. So when Spielberg moved DreamWorks, his production company, to Paramount, or from Paramount to Walt Disney in 2009, they had to switch directors, and it's just like interesting to read about that because it's stuff I don't really think about, like who's tied to what company.
Mm-hmm.
So they needed a new director for Interstellar, and Jonathan Nolan recommended his brother, and then Chris joined in 2012. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then also Warner Brothers, they still wanted a stake in this production. So they offered, against Paramount, and they make some kind of like, deal of like, okay, so Paramount, they'll have the rights to co-finance the next Friday the 13th movie, and they'll get a stake in a future film based off South Park, a TV series. So it's just like some of these little like deals that happen, when
It's
there's
like
like
almost bartering
it
at
is.
this level. It's not even
like,
cash.
It's like sports trades for like
Yeah.
first round pick. It's crazy.
I'm also laughing at we don't have Spielberg. Do we know anyone? And they're like, oh,
yeah.
well, the writer just puts his hand up and he's like, oh, yeah, I guess, I mean, my brother, Chris, he's made a movie or two. I mean, what a crazy pull that is. But I mean, the whole industry is very interconnected. And I'm sure part of the reason why Jonathan Nolan's foot is in the doors because his brother has a huge name as well.
Yeah.
But I do want to say, actually, just because I wasn't really aware, I had listened to a couple of podcasts actually recently that Jonathan Nolan had been on, and he's super well-spoken, super smart guy. But it just kind of piqued my interest of, his brother is such a huge name in the industry. He just won Best Picture and Best Director last year. So I was curious about his background, but he created Westworld for HBO, which I don't know if you watched that show.
Yeah, I did.
I think the first season certainly, but even the first episode, like incredible, really incredible stuff.
First two, I thought I think I might have watched the first 2 seasons and then I might have stopped. But I really enjoyed that for a while.
Yeah, I think that was incredible. He also wrote Memento, The Prestige, The Dark Knight Rises, and he also was uncredited on Batman Begins. And then he wrote Interstellar. And then also this past year, he was an EP and director on the Fallout TV show, which is notable because I think it's the first not complete trash video game to TV or film adaptation out there. I mean, there's a couple outliers.
Last of Us. What about Last of Us?
Last of Us was good. Last of Us was actually really good too, as far as video game to TV shows go. Yeah. And actually, I thought it was solid. But I thought they were both really good. So yeah, Jonathan Nolan, really good resume. Maybe not quite Christopher Nolan's, but like it's crazy that he gets overshadowed a bit. But he's done some really incredible work.
Yeah. You want to talk about Chris for a second? I can kick us off there.
Yeah, do it.
And before I go into that, I forgot to mention, so just stats on this movie: 4.4 average rating on Letterboxd. I think I mentioned that earlier. Viewed by 4.13 million, and it's the number 75 on the top 250 narrative feature films, which we talked about before, is the weighted rating. So this is a big deal. This movie, especially in the younger generation, is top of the line, which is why I think it's so great to talk about today. And then also 165 million budget. 734 million box office, so it did well. But yeah, I wanted to, first just ask you, like, what is kind of your relationship to Nolan? Are you a big Nolan fan? I think it's hard not to be in our age range, but how do you feel about Nolan?
I would say I'm definitely a big Nolan fan. Inception was a huge movie for me. As a kid, I thought it was incredible. I watched it over and over again. I would get like defensive when people would make the joke about it being convoluted. I remember there being a South Park episode that mocked it and was saying how silly it all was. And I was like, how could you not understand? And so, no, I loved Interstellar. Dark Knight was huge, although I was a little bit petrified at the time. I think that actually was right when I was on the cusp of actually being able to see somewhat scary or like disturbing things and being okay with it. Like, I think right before Dark Knight was when I was like, if I see an R-rated movie trailer when I'm watching the NBA finals, I'm going to have nightmares for a month.
Yeah.
And then just suddenly being completely desensitized to all of it. So I don't know if you want to do the rankings now or not, but I would say definitely love Nolan, was super impactful for me at an early age.
Yeah, let's hold on the rankings till after we talk about Interstellar.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm in the same boat. Actually, for a long time, I would have said like Nolan was my favorite director. And I think now, as I've like watched more movies, honestly, I realize his place, especially in my generation of film fans. He obviously has a special spot for a lot of us. I think he's a great director. I think he's a great introduction to like liking a director. Like, he's a great person to, you watch 12 of his movies, and it's like all these movies that, were big during our lifetime. And it's a good person to like get you into, okay, like, I want to see all the movies by this person, this person, this person. So he's definitely like the first director I really like cared about, But yeah, let me give a little background summary on him, because I think he's interesting to talk about. So he was an English major, but he was president of the Union Film Society, and made a couple short films in college, and then after college, before coming up with the idea for Following, which came out in 1998. And he actually shot that using just his friends and a budget of £3,000. And he shot it on the weekends over the course of like a year. And it did great. It got several awards, opened the doors for him, and he got the opportunity to make Memento in 2000, which was really like his breakthrough. I think it got nominated for a couple Oscars. That was his big break. But pretty impressive to just go right to that on your second movie. So when Steven Soderbergh saw Memento, he recommended Nolan to Warner to direct Insomnia, it's a remake of a Norwegian thriller. It's got Al Pacino, Robin Williams, Hilary Swank. Definitely should check that out. I think it's pretty underrated for Nolan. And then it was approached in 2003 by Warner about, he approached Warner in 2003 and wanted to make a new Batman film based off of Batman's origin story. And then Batman Begins comes out in 2005. It was the biggest project he had taken on to date. Was a huge success, obviously. Directed The Prestige in 2006. That one we can talk a little bit more about later. I think I'm in the minority on that one. I'm not a huge fan of that one.
Just to cut in really quickly, yeah. So sometimes when I hear the background of these directors in particular, you hear like, okay, he was like the president of the school union for Film Society. He started with some small films. He like has one that's successful. He's building up. And when I hear it in that context, I'm like, okay, it actually does make sense. I could see how someone gets onto this path. What gets confusing to me, though, is the jump from Insomnia to something like Batman Begins is so massive. The budget for Insomnia, I mean, it's not small. It's $46 million. Batman Begins is a $150 million movie with and it's a production that takes place across the world, right? Like there's scenes that are meant to be in Tibet, and then it's in the city, and there's so many different things going on there. I just don't know how any director, I mean, I guess it's part of what makes Nolan so special is he's able to do this, but that is such a huge amount of like financial, like organization that you have to do. I just don't know how you do that. Like,
I know. And I think it's even more confusing when you look at like directors from the 70s. Where their come up is really crazy. I think Nolan's steps actually kind of make sense. I mean, like following he did with what he had, it did pretty well. Memento was his idea, and it did really well. And then Soderbergh recommended him to Warner, right? And Insomnia, he had a little bit bigger budget with some pretty famous people on the cast. He's adapting another movie. He's doing a remake, and then the big jump is what you're talking about. Then he has a relationship with Warner now. He wants to do Batman, and then he gets that huge budget for Batman, which is crazy. But yeah, no, I agree. And then Warner comes back, right, and wants him to do a sequel. And he didn't want to do a sequel, but then in 2008, of course, we get The Dark Knight. We know how that went. And then because of the success of Dark Knight, he got to do Inception in 2010. He had the idea for Inception 9 years before and finally got to do it. And then finishes up the Batman trilogy in 2012 with Dark Knight Rises. And that takes us to today, Interstellar. Well, not today, but takes us to what we're talking about today. Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty cool. He has a pretty cool history to read about.
Yeah, it's absolutely great. I mean, and just before we leave this segment, I do want to just touch on his filmography. All of these films after those first couple are massive endeavors, and they tend to stay, I would say, sci-fi adjacent, or at least they're touching on something like that. But I just think even if he's a director that may or may not be your favorite, right? Like I think in some ways it's because maybe he doesn't satisfy certain niches that other directors might a little bit more, especially as you get really into filmographies and who your favorite, or what your favorite styles and genres are. I do feel like he has such a common thread of just making these epic and exciting movies. Like these are movies that actually draw audiences. I would consider a lot of these to be like the type of blockbuster that I'm more interested in, where yes, it's big and there's explosions and it's action and there's silly parts to them potentially, but I just feel like they're so much better crafted than a lot of what we've seen recently, that I do think we're missing something, like, or maybe we're not missing it because he's still making these. He made Oppenheimer last year and got Best Picture for it. But I do feel like this caliber of movie at this scale is missing currently.
Yeah, no, I think so too. You want to talk about actors, or do you have anything else production wise?
No, I'm happy to get into the actors. Yeah, I mean, the main one I wanted to talk about was McConaughey. This does find him smack dab in the middle of the McConaissance, which was a pretty crazy moment for him. I'm going to give you the lineup of what he did from 2012 through 2014. He's in Magic Mike 2012. Then he's in Mud, which gets him Dallas Buyers Club in 2013. He loses 50 pounds for the role.
Yeah.
It's a huge hit, critically acclaimed, and it was an incredible movie. Then he's in every single Lincoln commercial known to man, to the point where it gets parodied on SNL. He's in The Wolf of Wall Street for one scene, and arguably the most impactful or memorable scene of the entire movie, where he improv the most like memorable part of that scene.
Yeah.
With the chest pat. He's then in True Detective with Woody Harrelson, the first season, which is, for my money, the best season of television in history. And then he's in this same year, 2014. So that's an unbelievable 3-year run from 2012 to 2014.
Yeah, and I think if you go back even further, he has an interesting up and down where I don't know if you've ever checked out his book, Green Lights. I think I listened to an audiobook. Yeah, that was pretty good. It was pretty interesting. He's an interesting guy. But I mean, he has Dazed and Confused in 93, Time to Kill in 96, Amistad 97, a Spielberg movie. And then he's doing rom-coms. You know, it's like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, Ghosts of Girlfriend's Past. And then it's this renaissance that you're talking about. And I think he talked about that in the book, of that kind of up and down and getting stuck as like the rom-com guy and wanting to break out of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he talks about he had to take a couple of years off working, basically, because people just knew him as that, and he had been arrested while naked playing the bongos at home and getting high back before it was legal. And so, yeah, it was interesting to see. It took him a couple of years off for people to be willing to even give him that chance, and now he's, clearly a front runner for any part.
Yeah, definitely. And then the other person I want to talk about is Anne Hathaway. I mean, just another interesting career. Princess Diaries, 2001. I'm sure you're a fan of that one.
Oh my God, yeah. How could I not be? Everyone that was born in the mid 90s was into that movie.
Yeah, of course. Ella Enchanted, another banger.
I might have missed that one.
I saw that one. Devil Wears Prada, 2006. Get Smart, which I actually liked, and I didn't realize because I was a kid that like people hated it. I thought that was pretty good. And then Dark Knight Rises, 2012, and then this. It's pretty good.
Pretty good. Anne Hathaway, she's a working actress. I do have to, I mean, just because you brought it up, Devil Wears Prada might be a movie we have to do at some point, just to talk about Meryl Streep in that, but that's for another episode.
I've never seen it. So
you've never seen it? Wow. Okay.
No.
We might have to touch on that. There's also Emily Blunt in there, Stanley Tucci.
Okay.
It's a great cast.
Okay.
All right. Highs and lows, or do you want to go further?
Yeah, let me mention a couple more things. This is also the first time that Nolan worked with Hoyt van Hoytema, the cinematographer. He's the guy he also did Oppenheimer. I think he won an Oscar on Oppenheimer. But he had had a different cinematographer up until this point. So this was their first project working together. I did also want to mention a couple of his influences, which definitely ring true. These are what he's called his keys touchstones for this movie. So Metropolis, 1927 film, which I haven't seen, but I'm looking to check that out soon. 2001: A Space Odyssey, Blade Runner, Star Wars, Alien. So it's like, yeah, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then one more note I had on just the scientific accuracy. And I think this was kind of cool and maybe drive some of our conversation later. But yeah, you mentioned Kip earlier. So he's a theoretical physicist and he was a science consultant for this movie. He laid down 2 guidelines when they went out to do this. So first, nothing would violate established physical laws. And second, all the wild speculations would spring from science and not from the fertile mind of a screenwriter. That's a direct quote. So Nolan accepted these terms and said, hey, as long as it doesn't get in the way of making my film, all good. And apparently at one point they spent 2 weeks arguing because Nolan had a character traveling faster than light. And Nolan just finally gave up and was like, all right, fine. Which
is great because you have to imagine Christopher Nolan is like an unbelievable hard ass about getting what he wants. I just imagine anyone that is making movies of the scale has to be. So for this scientist to just be like, no, for 2 weeks is incredible.
Yeah, but I think that drives some of the conversation we're going to have on best and worst of how much they stuck to that science,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you want to lead us off with some of the best stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I do this most episodes if it's a good movie, knock on wood, but I think the opening cannot ever be undervalued or overvalued. especially in this movie, though. So when we first meet them on the farm, Coop, Murph, his father-in-law, and Timothée Chalamet's character, his son, I feel like there's such believable chemistry between them. I think they do an excellent job of actually being funny and actually caring about each other. And I think that is in particular huge because as the movie goes on, so much of the stakes to it are really still about the relationship between Coop and Murph.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so interesting because at no point do they ever interact with each other after the first 20 or so minutes of the movie. And yet you still feel a connection between them. You still feel like this desire for them to come back to one another, despite the fact that they're not only separated by the entire universe, but by at some point 70 years of time, right? And I feel like those stakes just do not matter or would not matter if you didn't believe in the chemistry and the care that they have between each other. So I think that the entire opening section does such a great job of laying that groundwork of who these characters are, why we care about them, why they care about each other. And then, you know, in the relationship stuff aside, they also do an incredible job of what is the conflict here with the blight. The shots of them driving through the cornfields are so memorable, and just very exciting in a very like high school teacher that is super into chemistry or science and is excited to teach his students about it sort of way. So I love the whole opening section.
Oh yeah, me too. And I mean, obviously the focus is on Murph, right? But I think Chalamet does such a great job in that like dirtbag kid role, and then obviously, wow, why am I blanking on his name?
Casey Affleck.
Yeah, Casey Affleck then does such a good job picking that up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Chalamet was great in these types of roles early in his career. I think Lady Bird is also a good example.
Oh, he's so good in Lady Bird.
Yeah, and I read an interesting thing is that if you look at his career, so he had only been in one movie before this, and it bombed. It was called Men, Women, and Children in 2014. It's the same year, but it came out a little bit before. And he said 10 years later that Interstellar was his favorite film he'd ever been in. But at the time, he was really disappointed because it didn't boost his fame at all. Like he did a great job in it, but then no one really cared. I thought that was interesting. Obviously, he's overcome.
Well,
that.
It worked out for him. We're still we're rooting for our guy Timothée Chalamet.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they're doing lookalike contests of him in Central Park. So
yeah, I don't quite understand that. And then I saw another one where they were doing a lookalike of somebody, and like none of the people looked like the person. So now it's just become like an internet thing.
Yeah, they did one for Glenn Powell that I thought was okay, but it wasn't great. Another thing I want to say, I love the Blight as a mechanic for just driving the story forward and putting like the rationale for why they're doing this. It's just like a clever way to give like this conflict to overcome, but they didn't make it about environmentalism, which just would have been, I think, kind of a messy subject or at least a distracting one where people would have been like, well, what about this? Or it should have been about that. And I mean, obviously there's a world of movies within that genre that are very important as well. But I just think this was a good conflict to keep the story on what they were actually trying to talk about. It's also nice that it wasn't about politics, because I do think that part of the enticing nature of this movie is because there is a sort of latent patriotism to it, or at least an optimism to it, that I think if it had gone full, the right stuff where it's about the US versus communism or something, it's like, that's not what this story is about. It's really about the human spirit. And I think in some ways that's a really, really exciting part, is like, it's not trying to say this is a US endeavor or like the US is doing this for everyone. So I like that it avoids politics as well.
Yeah, and I think they don't over explain this area of the movie of like how things got this bad on Earth. Like you're just kind of thrown into it. You don't it's not super clear what year it is or what happened, but okay, people have to be farmers now. We're not spending money on space travel. We've actually even scrubbed even history of space travel from textbooks. And you're just kind of right into it. It doesn't take too much time setting the stage. And I like that part of it too.
Also, already brought it up earlier, but McConaughey is the center of this movie in so many ways, and he's doing a lot of different things with this part. He's strong yet emotional. He's selfish and selfless. He is an astronaut and a farmer. I think he just completely crushes this part. And it is really, I'm glad you brought up earlier that prior to this, or at least, 5+ years prior to this, before the reconnaissance, he really was just viewed as like a rom-com, kind of goofy, dumb, good-looking comedic actor. And so for this performance to come out of him 5 years later is incredible. Like I think the scenes of him watching the videos of his children and his father-in-law are amongst the most moving scenes and performances I've ever seen.
Yeah, and Nolan said something interesting about this, which I think is key here. Is he wanted an actor to bring the everyman to life. You know, he wanted the audience to experience the story with the everyman. He saw Mud, and he was interested in McConaughey after seeing that. And that's what I think he does really well. I think people are mixed on McConaughey in this movie, which I don't quite understand. I think if you're looking at it through that lens, it's perfect.
Oh, really? People are mixed on it?
Yeah, I think so. I think people are a little mixed on him.
I've never heard this. I mean, maybe I'm just on the wrong forums. But...
I read a lot of Letterboxd comments.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad I'm staying away from that. I feel like reading too much of anything online just robs you of your happiness.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned that the scene. I just wanted to put a point on it too, of like the driving through the crop scene is awesome. And I guess it doesn't end up really mattering. Like I don't know why they caught that plane. Like what did that plane do? The little. Well,
he's going to use it as the innards for another harvester.
Okay. Yeah, but it's just a cool scene, and I'm okay with that.
No, I know you're afraid to dream, but some of us still enjoy it every now and then.
Can you explain the science behind that harvester to me? I think I need to understand that before I can really...
I do feel like I need to bring up the fact that, because I brought up a second ago, the recordings of him watching his children and being devastated about it. So I've said it on a previous call, but there's just something within me that's broken, and that is what it is. I think anyone that's watching this many movies probably has a similar illness. I can't remember the last time I cried, sincerely. I was at the IMAX showing this past weekend. It's just me by myself, dead center, perfect seat in this theater. The first time that he's watching those videos and he just starts breaking down, I just had like a solitary tear, and I just didn't even wipe it. I was like, I haven't felt this in years. I need to feel this moisture.
You mean to tell me you didn't cry in Moana 2 when well, spoiler alert, turn this off if you're gonna see Moana 2. Moana almost dies and doesn't die? You mean there wasn't any tears during that?
I was so high for watching that movie, and even still, I was like, at no point did I think there was no stakes there. I can't believe they even tried to pretend like we thought she was going to die in that.
Yeah. Actually, at one point when I think it's her, when she's like reaching to like plant the thing on the island that's underwater or whatever, and it's going super slow-mo and like the lightning bolt's about to catch up to her, some guy in the audience was like, come on. Like he was like upset. He was like upset.
It's
a kid's movie.
Don't be an asshole.
Yeah,
that's so funny.
No, but I love that scene too. I think it's just super powerful. That last scene between them, and I think even more so when you know that it's him.
And you're still talking about Moana, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. No, I love that one.
No, when you know it's him saying to stay too. I mean, obviously it's so obvious when you watch it the second time, but it's cool. Like it makes it even more emotional.
Yeah. Some of the other, like, as much as we're talking about like the exciting science and the the themes and all the stuff that's going on, like the performances, also this is really just like the visuals to this movie are unbelievable. Like especially, and I know that when you rewatched this recently, you watched it. I'm outing you right now, but you watched it at home in 2 sittings, which is a cardinal sin that I do all the time. But I'm telling you, if you had seen this in IMAX, the scene of the cornfields are great, but like entering the wormhole and seeing Gargantua and the waves of the ocean planet, unbelievable. Like truly, these are like the sort of shots that just I will never stop thinking about. And the waves in particular in Gargantua are ones that even if I hadn't seen this movie in 10 years, I never stopped thinking about those.
Oh, yeah.
I thought they were so incredible.
That's actually the one scene that I never stopped thinking about. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that back up, because I said that earlier that there wasn't much that stayed with me. That one for sure. And maybe because it was in the trailer. Like I just remember that, like, that's not a mountain. Like I feel like that was in the trailer, And then Tar's running, is it's just so
Oh, it's
sick.
so
Yeah.
satisfying. It's
Yeah.
so satisfying. And I think part of the Waves one, I don't know if you feel this way. This is my tinfoil hat theory here, but it really does feel, I think maybe part of why it's so sticky is it feels like a dream that I've had 1,000 times. The combination of seeing a wave on the horizon, like a massive tsunami, and then even more so the feeling of moving slowly when you're trying to run, like that you can't sprint, you're running from something in a dream. Um, both of those together, it's like it feels so tactile. Like it feels like you've been there at least once or
Yeah.
twice in your psyche. And it just like for that reason makes it that much scarier and that much more real.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I was gonna nitpick the fact that like, how did that one dude not get back on the ship? He had so much time, but but to your point, yeah, I mean, it is kind of like how did it's like you're in a dream. How did he not get back on the ship? And I do need to before I forget, I'm not a 2 sitting movie person typically. It was a tough week at work.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah, just on my favorite movie. It's okay.
yeah. No,
Cap.
it was not ideal. It was not ideal this week.
So I mentioned the visual. Are there any other visuals you wanted to bring up? I was gonna go.
I have a couple more things I liked, but nothing else visual.
Okay. I was just gonna say I also want to touch on the soundtrack because I think it's absolutely spectacular.
Yeah.
If the visual item that I never stopped thinking about was the wave planet, I will always have the organ music that is going when he is syncing up with the endurance. That'll be with me till I die. It is so good, and it's been heavily memed, right? It's even on Twitter. People post videos of stuff like that all the time, and I think the reason is because it's such a singular sound. Like I made fun of, or at least I've criticized Zimmer for having some works that sound like they overlap a little bit between movies, but this to me was a really singular score that I hadn't heard before.
Oh, Zimmer's the man. And if people are saying, or people are memeing it on Twitter, you got to get off Twitter. I'll get off Letterboxd. You get off Twitter because there's nothing to make fun of here. But let me give you some more on the music. So it's actually interesting the process for Zimmer coming up with this. So Nolan chose not to provide Zimmer with a script, any plot details. He just gave him a short story. And it's a stretch to call this a short story, but it was a father leaving a child to complete an important job, and the story just contained 2 sentences of dialogue. It said, "I'll come back," and then "when." And then he said, Zimmer, go spend some time on this. Zimmer took 1 day. He came up with some kind of interpretations of the story, and initially didn't think it was going to be power enough for what Nolan eventually told him the film would be, which is this epic space film. But Nolan was like, no, this is perfect. This is exactly what I was looking for. And then that little piece he came up with ended up becoming the song at the end of the movie. And that melody, kind of plays throughout. And then back in 2022, Zimmer came back around and said, yeah, this is my best work. And I agree. I mean, this soundtrack's unbelievable. One I still listen to all the time. I definitely have stuck with me.
Oh, it's incredible. And also the organ that he used to play on this is from 1926. It's in Temple Church in London. So it's also just cool that we're 2 years away from that instrument being 100 years old. And meanwhile, we're making sci-fi movies like using that instrument to like evoke emotion. So it's a little bit cool, like past, present, and future thrown in there.
Yeah. I got a couple other good things I want to mention. I mean, you talked about like another emotional scene for me is when he's catching up on the 23 years of video, and I just love that. Like just going through the different clips. I think Casey Affleck's perfect. It's like a legit perfect cast.
So good.
I think Jessica Chastain is great, and I almost wish there was more for her in this movie. I get why there's not, and there's not enough time, and I already had to split it up into 2 nights, so like maybe more wouldn't have been good. But I think
splitting it up into 3 isn't much for a guy like you anyway, so it's pretty much the norm.
Yeah, now that I would never do. No, but I think she's amazing in this, and I also think it's awesome. Like just a thing I liked in the story is finding out that Plan A was just a lie. And there was no equation that worked, and I think it was a great decision because it makes Michael Caine the kind of the bad guy, and it just adds more emotion to the story, and I just think that was a great decision.
Yep, agreed. Also, just Michael Caine in general in this movie, I think he's really excellent. I think sometimes I just don't even compliment Michael Caine because he's so good in everything, but He's great in this. Just another notch in the bedpost for Michael Caine, though.
Oh yeah. He's so good. And then the other guy that I love is John Lithgow.
Lithgow, he's
Yeah,
great.
and
So good.
as I've been going through De Palma movies, he keeps coming up, and yeah, he's awesome. And then we haven't talked about it yet, but Matt Damon.
I had that next. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I stole your thunder.
No, not at all.
I completely forgot he was in this. I hadn't seen this since it came out in 2014, and I just had completely forgot. And he like, even not really remembering what happened, you get the sense he's bad right away, and then his death is just amazing. But I'll kick it over to you. I'm sure you have more to say about Damon.
Well, so first of all, he wasn't marketed as being in the movie at all, so it was a complete surprise when he shows up. And I can't lie that I would be plagiarizing, but I did see some tweet that was basically saying like, it's incredible that they basically weaponize how Matt Damon looks like Americana to us at this point to make us trust him and think he is the best. As soon as you see Matt Damon, you're like, oh, he's someone I trust and know, right? And then the turn that he has is so brutal, and he plays this perfect, just fucking coward in every sense. Like he's basically convinced all these people to give up their lives. Not just anyone. These are presumably the best men and women that planet Earth has to offer, right? And they all lay their lives down in the hope of possibly saving humanity. He gets sent out there. He gets saved. Immediately he cries, but you're like, wow, Jesus Christ, it must be lonely out here. But then, he presses the button, even though it's not a habitable planet. So that's one little bit of cowardice. Then he goes to kill McConaughey, and he's like, but don't worry, I'm going to stay with you through it all. And then he's like, 10 seconds go by. He's like, all right, I can't really do this, but I'm going to stand on the ridge and I'll be here on the intercom with you. 10 seconds go by. He does this. So just over and over again, this guy is just a coward. And then the outro they have for him of trying to dock the ship, and you can just see the panicked insanity in his eyes. I completely jumped in my seat when he's like, there comes a time, and the space station explodes around him. I fully jumped in my seat for that. I did not remember the cutaway of that at all. Did you have that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I did kind of. It started to come back to me as I was going through it. Like when he's like, oh okay, like he's a little shady. He's like, oh, like that the robot doesn't work anymore. Like he's kind of they're planting the seeds, and then obviously like so I started to remember. Okay, that's right, he's bad. But then yeah, like the only note I'll make is like he didn't seem crazed in that moment when he's about to die to me. And I think it makes it so much better that he's just like this man on a mission. He's like, oh, this is like it's like this is what I got to do now. Okay, like this is not quite docked right, but whatever. Like if I kill all these other people, like I already tried to kill. He's just like, okay, he's kind of locked into like this is what I'm doing. And you have to think about too, like what was his like? Did he come up with this plan before he put himself to sleep? Right? He was like, okay, no one's coming, but if anyone comes, I'm gonna rig the ship with explosives, which he had to have done before. And I'm gonna take their ship, and I'm gonna save myself.
Yeah, he must have. I mean, I hadn't really thought about how much of that he had prepped, but that makes sense now that I think about it. I do think he has one of the hardest movie villain lines in the last 20 years, though, which is when he's smashing McConaughey's helmet against his, and he's like, you got a 50-50 shot that it'll break yours. And he's like, those are the best odds I've had in years.
Yeah.
You're like, you believe him. You're like, holy fucking shit, this guy is desperate. And I think that's incredible. I love that line.
Yeah, he's so cold, and like when he's on the ship and they're radioing him in, and he's just kind of turning it off. He's like, man, whatever. Like this is my last chance. I'm gonna do this. Like, yeah, he's almost so detached from like any emotion at that point after being alone for so long that he's just like, oh, this is my opportunity.
Yep. I also want to bring up I guess I'll say quickly. I just love that each of the 3 planets they go to have such character to them in a unique way. I think it's like they're like clearly identifiable between the 3 of them. Obviously the least, or the third we see the least of, because it's just kind of a couple of cutaway shots with Anne Hathaway. But like the 3 of them really do feel like fleshed out and like beautiful and kind of horrifying in their own way. So I just want to call that out. But then also, we touched on it, but the TARS and Case robots, I think they just have such a unique, crazy design that I love. They're it's not quite chunky sci-fi. They're kind of modern looking and sleek in a way, but they're also kind of like almost hideous in like the Spy Kids thumb assistant sort of way. But I
Yeah.
love the personality of them. I actually think they have incredible writing, and like the voice acting for them is so good that you feel like they're as much characters as anyone else on the ship.
Well, and the voice acting is completely human, which is different from, say, 2001, where it is a human, but it still feels like a robot, you know? There's something cool about that, where, like, you know, this is, I think it's supposed to be like 2060 something, 67 or something. And it's just, yeah, it's just like a human voice.
Yeah, but just their design is so good. The way they move, especially when they're rolling on the water, is so satisfying.
Yeah.
Even seeing Tars run out of the flaming ship looks so cool at the end. So I love the robots. I think they did an incredible job there.
Yeah. Another guy, just a shout out. I didn't look up his name, but the guy who's left on the ship when the 23 years passes, I think he does an awesome job too. He's like a little bit gray now. He's kind of like
going crazy.
You just feel for him. He's just been alone for 23 years, like working on his equations, and then now they're back. He's like, oh, okay.
Well, I don't have anything else in my best of list, but I mean, there's so many other things I like about this movie. So I do just want to wrap it up by saying, at least on my end, I think one of the most exciting things about this movie is just like the optimism to it. I do feel like, understandably, there are not a lot of movies that have this type of optimism about really the human race as a whole. And I think that's, because understandably there's a lot going on in the global political climate. It almost feels like we're in a new age of warfare and assassination and a lot of other unseemly things. So art is always going to reflect that to an extent. But I do feel like there's such an allure of like people's willingness to sacrifice for others, for people's willingness to roll the dice on themselves and like what we're capable of, and to dream. Like, I think that that's such a moving message that we don't always see nowadays. And I think, at least for me, that made it really inspiring. And when you combine that, it can't be taken away from like how empowering the score of it is, how exciting the visuals are, and the performances alongside it. Like, to me, it was honestly, it felt like an incredibly inspiring experience. Just seeing this, again in theaters a couple days ago. So I think the fact that this is a piece of art that could, I think a lot of times it's almost like a movie is a magic trick where after you've seen it the first time, a little bit of the shine wears off. And if anything, I feel just such a greater appreciation for what the message of it is and what it accomplishes after having seen it before, that like it just adds to it for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You want to talk about some of the not so good stuff?
Yes. There are some nitpicks to be found here.
I don't know if you had any.
I do.
Okay. Well, let me start with a big one. And I'm open to all of these. I'm open to debate on. I really like this movie, but I'm trying to see where it lands. Right, like I said before, where does it land in science fiction films for me? There's a lot of science stuff thrown at you, and I think if it's too complicated for me, the common viewer, to understand, I don't need all the time explaining it. And I think this is a common nitpick of the movie. So this is not my own original thought, but definitely one that I agree with. And I do think it just spent a lot of time explaining things that don't end up really contributing to the story. Cause it's just over my head. I don't, and maybe it's to the point we were talking about earlier with Kip, where they were really focused on having this be accurate. And I think it does hurt the film a bit.
Was there something in particular that you thought was too much?
I mean, basically anytime they're talking about wormholes and black holes and, I mean, in anything in the lab, it's just, it's not that it's too much. And I'm like, it's just like, I kind of tune out. I just want to take in the visuals and like, the way I'm watching, I compare it to something like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where it's so not focused on explaining anything. And like, it's more focused on the mystique of space and the mystery of life beyond our life and what came before us. And this is super laser focused on trying to explain that all and have a more positive ending. That's where it falls a little bit short for me.
I agree. I think there's aspects of it that I enjoy. Like, I like that they're willing to trust the viewer enough to talk about certain things. I mean, the fact that we're even talking about wormholes and other movies, we're talking about parallel universes and the multiverse and things like that. As much as these are like putting forward some complex ideas or something the average viewer might not know about in terms of astrophysics, the only reason we're having any conversation about things that now we consider normal, like time travel or a parallel universe, is because there were movies beforehand that were willing to roll the dice on the average viewer understanding these things.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways it's cool that even if some of these are very abstract thoughts that really are not relevant for the average person, choosing to roll the dice on including them in your movie means that someday in the future they could be something that the average viewer could understand, which is exciting because it just opens the door wider for like new sci-fi topics and ideas. But I do totally agree to your point of there's aspects of it that are just done a little sloppily. I think when they're talking about the like how a wormhole works and he pushes the piece of or the pencil through the piece of paper, say that 10 times fast.
Yeah.
I enjoy that. I thought that was like a fun, if maybe overly simplistic metaphor for how that works. But I think when it starts talking about like specifically Michael Caine's part with like his study on gravity and how that can work, it just didn't feel fully fleshed out. And even as someone that's like, if I love this movie as much as I've had or as I do, and I've done the research on it that I have for this podcast, and it's still a little unclear to me what that topic is, then it's like, okay, I think you probably didn't do the best job you could have in like fleshing out that aspect of the story. So I definitely agree with those parts.
Yeah, I think another, and I'm going to talk more about the ending here in a second, but like when Tars is explaining like the Tesseract to him and how it works, and I'm just like, what? Like I'm looking at a guy floating around a bookshelf. Like how are you going to make this make sense to me? Like that's when it just gets to be too much.
Yeah, I think, and also it's a little explicative, and a little, I don't want to call it lazy because clearly they did so much work. Like they did a ton of research. I think if anything, they were just getting more concerned about the viewer's understanding of what's going on. So I think that that's just a little ham-fisted, to be honest. I agree that that's one of the weaker parts of the movie.
Yeah, but yeah, I think what really holds it back for me of being like perfect to me is the ending, and this I'd be open to some discussion on, because I think some people might really like ending it this way, but me personally, like it's just not how I like things to be wrapped up. I mean, first of all, I towards the end, I still don't have any idea how anything works. Like, how is he moving the watch? But I'm like, okay, I'm go. Like, there's certain things where I'm like, you know what, fine, I'll go with it. He's moving the watch. He's doing Morse code. Cool, whatever. It's kind of what I talked about earlier. I'll take a step back and just let it happen. That's fine. But then, like when we get into stuff that I do understand, and it makes no sense, is like, okay, it starts to get actually worse every minute it goes on, and I think that last half an hour, where like, you got to just let Matt die. Like, why is McConaughey still alive? It just becomes super sappy to me. Like, and if you look at the timeline, okay, he goes in the black hole, he lands in the Tesseract, manipulates a few things, it all dissolves. Now he's on the ship. Oh, now he's back at his house. Now he gets to see his daughter again. Now he gets to see Anne Hathaway again. Like, how? Like, if there's one thing I need an explanation on, is how is this man alive? And that's what I think is really hurting it for me.
Yeah, I think those are super valid. I also agree that that is where the movie falls off a little bit. And I think in some ways it's not necessarily the fault of the ending, because I think the buildup immediately prior is such a high of like the Matt Damon explosion, and they're like reconnecting to the Endurance, and then they're doing this slingshot through Gargantua. Like those are such highs that I do think the ending is a little too long. And it's hard to come down from that. It's almost like either they should have shortened the ending or, had some other type of climax that didn't feel like, I don't know, it's too long of a resolution period. So I agree. I do think I didn't have the issue of him surviving. I think it would have been more frustrating if like, I don't mind him surviving because there is ultimately a sacrifice that he makes, which is essentially everyone he knows and loves is gone. Like he's almost, for all intents and purposes, in a parallel universe because there's not a soul that he knows or cares about him or vice versa. So he pays a price there.
True.
There is a slim sliver of hope in maybe seeing Anne Hathaway's character again, should he be able to find her. But like, I like that he made a sacrifice. I think it would have been even more frustrating if he just time traveled back and suddenly was like back with Murph and his son. So I like that he ultimately has to deal with that. I do have some issues with the Anne Hathaway's like love is the one thing we can feel across space and time.
Yeah.
It just doesn't really fit in with the rest of it. And even in the movie when she's like, what, like, McConaughey's like, well, there's reasons for that, social like engineering and rearing and child care and all those. And she's like, well, what about for dead people? It's like, well, there's reasons for that too. Like, it still incentivizes people to act well while they're alive, so they'll be respected when they're dead because we care about that. So I just didn't really fully buy that piece of it. I think the idea with the Tesseract, though, and like how he's able to interact with them, I mean, I can't claim to understand like all of the astrophysics to it, but I think the idea that they're trying to claim is that through the Tesseract, which is like an existing theoretical physics idea of like basically like a 4 or 5 dimensional object, he's able to only manipulate gravity slightly. And so that's why like when the dust is falling, it has like those lines between them because basically gravity is routing the dust towards those little lines. And so I think what they're trying to imply is that within the Tesseract, you can minutely affect gravity through time, which is what they've been saying throughout the movie. And so he's doing it through applying Morse code to the hand of that watch. I actually have an issue with that as well, because the idea that the data they're collecting from the black hole Gargantua, which in theory could save humanity by getting them off of planet Earth, which is already too complex. That's too much. But the idea even that you could do that, the amount of time it would take to transfer that knowledge via binary, I think would take decade. I don't know how fast you can like monitor binary on a watch, but anyway, so that's a little nitpicky for sure, but I agree with what you're saying. It does get a little slower at the end there, and I think a little bit too science-y.
Yeah, and I'm willing to look past all that. You can make the same, you can ask the same questions about 2001: A Space Odyssey of like, how did that baby get in the sky at the end? Like it's the same. You can. Well, I mean, that one there it's all alien stuff, so they're leaning on to the alien stuff there, and that's an interesting one to discuss. But I think where I have a problem with it is they should have just had him die after he did what he needed to do. It's resolved. She knows that he was the one helping her whole life, and great. She gets to now she dies and the world is saved and we're all good. I just didn't think we needed him to show up at the end.
God, yeah, honestly, it had never even really crossed my mind. I think just because I was so locked in, but I could see where you're coming from with that.
Yeah. But I mean, that's really it. I mean, this is a great movie. I really like it. And I just think those are the couple things that hold it back for me as being like top of the line movie, science fiction movie. But it's right up there.
Agreed. I do want to, before we go into some of the hot takes, I feel like this just kind of naturally does go into a question I did have, which is sort of like a scoring philosophy. And how do you think about these movies when you give them, ultimately it's a silly endeavor. We talk about it a lot, but applying a 1 through 5 star system to a movie is a bit silly, right? Like, it's just humans trying to be objective and applying these metrics to things that are clearly very subjective. And so at the same time, I get the appeal of it, though. Like, I love to make lists and rank things, but it does beg the question of like, what is your philosophy going to be when you're looking at this movie versus another, if you're trying to have some sort of standardization between it. And so one question I was having an issue with is, I totally agree that this movie does have some weaknesses and some plot holy stuff going on. And I absolutely love the highs of this. But that being said, there's a couple of things that I would, to me, consider imperfections. And so I'm like, how could I give it a perfect score if it's imperfect? And then I think of another movie. What was the one? Like Little Miss Sunshine. Completely different movie, so much smaller. The stakes are non-existent in comparison. And maybe to me, the highs aren't quite as high, but maybe I don't have a single note about it. I'm not saying that's the case. But like, maybe to me, that is a 5-star movie or something. And it's like, well, how could I apply one score to one? And what's the metrics and methodology I'd apply to the two of them? And I think what I ultimately came down to was I almost feel like the difference between those two different movies, and this is like a little bit of a garish comparison, but it almost feels like comparing like college football to like the NFL a little bit, where it's like both of the, it's not meant to be a slight to either of them, but to be honest, Little Miss Sunshine is such a smaller undertaking and it's not trying to be massive, and that's a perk of it. And it's still populated those styles of movies with people that are lifelong professionals that have dedicated themselves to the craft. But at the same time, it feels a bit unfair to compare the complexity, the financing, all of the people, the artists, and like all the teams that develop these designs and then physically build out the props. I mean, we didn't even talk about this, but like they called, instead of calling them miniatures, they called them maxatures when they built out the three different ships, because some of them were like 100 feet in size. And it just doesn't feel like a good faith methodology to say that these are the same when I think about which one I had a couple problems with the scientific dialogue, when there was so much complexity and so much they did right. And so anyway, those were the things I was thinking about this past week when I was like, do I want to give this a 5-star because it means so much to me? Or even though I had some issues with the back half and maybe the ending isn't perfect. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk about that. I kind of I try to take like an analytical approach to it and like think about it this way, even if I don't actually end up scoring it this way. Like this is kind of how it starts to go in my mind, where I'm watching something and I start to get an idea, midway through. I'm gonna at the end, I'm like, okay, the cinematography, that's perfect. The performances, perfect. The story, okay. I have some issues with the story of how things were explained, how things were wrapped up. I'm not totally there on the story. That's maybe holding it back a bit. Is this is this a hugely impactful movie to me? One of my favorites. Maybe it gets a little boost for that. Where does it sit within its genre? Maybe it gets a little boost for that because it's like, if it's like to your point, you can't really, grade a comedy the same way you grade sci-fi. That you have to kind of take. But if you think about it in those broad stroke categories, that's usually how I come up with the scoring. And I think, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to make one standard approach you can use apply against every movie. But when I think about this one, I have too many issues with the story to give it like perfect,
Mm-hmm.
and that's if that starts to bring it down, I'm like, well, how much does it bring it down? And is it truly one of my favorite movies? And that's kind of how I land where I land.
That's totally fair. I guess my thought was just and I'm not even, I know this isn't a perfect movie for you. It's not a perfect movie for me, but I do ultimately, it begged the question to me of like, if there are two movies that both have great aspects to them and one just has a few less bad aspects, but the one with a couple, more imperfections is so much more complex and it's seeking such greater highs and it's attempting so much more, like that to me has to add some points to it as well.
Yeah, I agree. And then I would compare it to something that like I think also did it like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where yes, it might not be one I just throw on, a couple times a year, but like that's a near perfect movie to me. And I think some of the mystery in the story and not trying to over explain things and like wrapping it up in an interesting way that like sparks discussion, and kind of leaves you like thinking about it. That's why I think this is a little bit behind that. But I kind of have to compare it to other things that I score higher.
No, I totally agree. I think if they had gone a different direction with the Tesseract piece of being maybe even more unclear and less of the dialogue there, which is a little chunky in its own way and ham fisted, but I think if they had made it more open ended there, it probably would have benefited from that.
Yeah. I mean, I can give you kind of a summary of how I scored it since we're talking about it. Then we can go back if
Mm-hmm.
we have like a hot take. But like, I give it a 4 out of 5. And it's because there's enough good here to cancel out what I think is a really bad ending. I honestly think the last like 20 minutes are pretty bad. I mentioned this earlier. I almost just tune out when everything is getting explained over and over. Because I'll tune in if I think I can get something out of it, and I'm not going to learn about theoretical physics watching this movie. But I just take it in, and I really enjoy a lot of the scenes, like the corn chase and the big wave on that one planet. And the music is so great. That's another category that can boost it up. I'm talking about my analytical scoring. If it's an iconic soundtrack that I listen to on the regular, that might give it a boost. The space stuff looks great. but when I'm looking at it against something like a 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's just a little bit below that. And I think part of the reason I love films of Chris Nolan like this one is when I rewatch them as I've gotten older, I find some flaws like this of like, oh, okay, the story's not that good, or maybe the writing's not that good. But this is still a great movie. Like, I still really enjoyed watching this. And I think I've always felt this way about this movie, and this kind of reconfirmed that and reconfirmed where it sits in my rankings. But it's no knock to how much like an amazing feat this is, and I understand why this is such a big movie for so many people, and that's really what I wanted to get out of it rewatching it this time.
Agreed. I will say comparing anything to 2001: A Space Odyssey is tough. It's tough. Arguably like it is in the argument for like best movies of all time too.
But even like Alien, like compared to another sci-fi like Alien, like I don't have as many nits to pick with that story. Now it's a much more like action focused, thriller focused story. But as a sci-fi movie, like that's a sci-fi movie that I enjoy a lot more.
For sure, but again, it's like it's just so much smaller. And in some ways, like I think that's a beautiful and like that's a choice. Like, I mean, maybe not in their context, maybe they just were constrained by budget. I think they likely were on Alien. But again, I just think it's so easy to take for granted the scale of what you're seeing before you. And especially like your and I's generation, we just take for granted the visuals that we get to see whenever a movie like this comes out. Like, it's so monumental that when they push forward these types of like visuals and graphics and new sciences and technologies that it requires to design these things. And I'm not saying this to try and convince you. I totally get where you're coming from on your end. I just do think it's like, it's so easy for us to subconsciously be like, oh, well, this is what movies look like. And it's like, that's only because there are people and artists and producers that are willing to take big swings to develop these technologies and to like, hone these crafts and come up with these beautiful visuals and and symphonies and whatnot.
No, I think it's an interesting point, and it kind of makes me think, like, should we just evaluate movies by the output, right? Should we take all that even into consideration if we're going to critique a film? Because if we do, like, how do we measure something from the 1920s against something from today? Like, how do you even start to do that if you take into, well, okay, at that time they didn't have all this, but like they made the best of what they had. Like, couldn't that, like, that has just, if it has all the other things I talked about, which like great cinematography, great performances, great sound, a great story, that can be a 5-star movie from the 1920s just as much as one from today does. Now, I get your point that you maybe should consider all the other aspects, but I think when I'm evaluating the output, how I have been doing it is taking all that away.
Mm-hmm. No, so how much does context play into yours? Because I would agree with your point about if it's an older movie, like I'm not going to give it shit for like, the camera work looks worse or maybe like it's lower resolution or the audio is a little janky. It's like, I understand they were constrained by the time. So I'm happy to, within context, be like, okay, like no notes on that. Like that was just literally the technology available to them or, other things of that nature.
Yeah, that's another good question. It's like, I take something like Jaws, which is like, does it get an extra boost because it created the summer blockbuster? To me, no. To me, that's a 5-star movie for all the other reasons I listed. And it also...
I would give it some points for that.
Okay.
Its influence matters to me.
And I think that's totally fair. When I try to take that out, I think, when I'm looking at it. If not, all the movies on that AFI 100 list, I'd give 5 stars because they all were super impactful for their time. But like, I watched something like Duck Soup, which is like a Marx Brothers movie. I thought it was terrible. And at that time, it was like super groundbreaking. The jokes were like, no one had ever said anything like this before. And when I watch it today, it sucks. So it's like, it's I don't know. Does that make sense though? It's
no,
hard.
I totally agree. Yeah. I should also clarify that I'm a hypocrite. Like if I don't like a movie, I'm like, fuck this movie. I don't fucking give a shit. Even if it was like impactful or influential, I don't give a shit. It's really only like if I like it, or maybe if I liked it with some qualms, I'll give it the wiggle room of being like, hey, I respect what this did. But like if I just don't like it, like if I don't I mean, I have this issue, especially with some older movies, where it's like just editing has changed so dramatically in the last 50 years. Of things
Right.
are so fast now, and my tiny little hamster brain that's smooth like a pebble needs them to move. And so if I watch something that's too slow for me for whatever reason, I'm like, I mean, I'll give it some wiggle room, but to be honest, I just didn't enjoy this. This is just not the type of movie that I'm interested in anymore. And then in that case, I'm just going to apply the score of what I feel.
Yeah, and
So
I think
it's all context dependent.
no, and I think all that matters is that like you as a reviewer or a critic are have some sort of consistent approach, right? Because if someone's looking for your opinion on a movie, like when you're reading a Roger Ebert review, like when he gives it 4 stars versus 2 stars, like like okay where he's landing on it, and like that's I guess what I'm trying to do too, of have a consistent like what is a 5-star movie to me versus a 3-star, and we might have different criteria, and it's there's no way to come up with a standard approach for how everyone should score movies. But when someone's going to see what Nick Lydon thought, like some kind of a consistent approach like helps set that stage.
Agreed. Yeah, but I was just curious to hear what your thoughts were on
No,
it.
that's
So
a great. I really like that conversation. I guess we haven't really ever talked about that, but there's no. I'm passionate about this because I really like the analytical and scoring and ranking stuff. But there's no right or I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it, and I totally understand bringing those other things into context when you're thinking about it.
Agreed. Okay, we should wrap up our last hot takes for Interstellar.
Yeah. You want to go first?
I just have one. Is this movie better if Anne Hathaway and Jessica Chastain switch roles?
Oh yeah, I think that's a great one. I don't think Anne Hathaway is super compelling. I think Jessica Chastain is.
I agree.
But to your earlier point, this movie rides on that connection, right? And her not being on screen that often, and you still really feel that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, you still really feel that when she's back. It's
is this movie
hard.
better? Let me revise this question. Is this movie better if we clone Jessica Chastain? She plays both parts, just with different hair.
Yeah, I think you're saying is this movie better without Anne Hathaway?
Yeah, I just thought she. I mean, she's fine. She's not like she doesn't hold the movie back by any means, but yeah, I don't know. I think Jessica Chastain, and I'm actually not always a huge Jessica Chastain fan, but I think she's really solid in this.
Well, let me ask you this: could anyone do it other than McConaughey?
Gosh, I would have to think on this.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I could not think of another one. I think it works like the kind of Texas farmer, the everyman. Like I can't. I really can't think of anyone else in this.
I was just gonna say, like, could it be like oh fuck, who plays Danny Ocean in Ocean's 11?
Oh, Clooney.
I was like, oh, Clooney, I could see him. And then as soon as you said like
too suave
farm, I'm like, that guy's not on a fucking farm.
He's too suave.
I don't know if I see that.
Maybe Brad Pitt. Maybe Brad Pitt could do it.
No, I can't see Brad Pitt with a family.
Fair point.
I don't see him really having a daughter that he connects with. They have to have like some sort of dad energy.
He's got like 10 kids, right?
I don't think they love him. I think there was like, this is hearsay, so you can't sue me, anyone. But okay. I thought I read that he like got in like an altercation with one on like a plane.
Oh, this is bad.
Yeah, it was no good.
My hot take. Go ahead.
No. Oh, sorry. No, you go.
My hot take is I think this is Nolan's 8th best movie.
Oh my fucking god! I'm gonna.
I know.
You don't need to say that on this call.
But
you can say that on your other calls.
But it's because his movies are so good. And
let me
read you my
fucking patronize me with that.
Let me read
it's because he's so good.
Well, let me read you my list.
Okay.
And I want to hear yours.
Okay.
Dark Knight is my number 1.
Okay, it's my number 2.
Number 2, Inception.
It's my number 3.
Number 3, Oppenheimer.
That's pretty far down for me.
Okay. Number 4, Memento.
That's on the bottom.
5, Dunkirk.
Oh, I also have that as 5.
Dunkirk's really good. Dunkirk's a sleeper pick.
I need to rewatch. I should say I need to rewatch a number of these. I haven't seen them since like college, and I was kind of hungover at the time. So
fair. Then I go Dark Knight Rises, then Batman Begins, then Interstellar.
What about Tenet?
Man, I got Tenet at 11. Man, I got to rewatch it. I know people are reclaiming that, and I just couldn't get into it.
This is probably recency bias. I have Interstellar number 1, baby.
That's fair. That's
Number
so many
1.
people do. I
John,
understand.
I wish you saw this in IMAX so fucking bad. You should just go. Just go this weekend, watch it in IMAX. Dedicate another 3 hours to this movie.
We'll do a follow-up pod with my new list. Yeah, I mean, I think the other big one on my list that people wouldn't like is Prestige. I have Prestige at 10. I just do not really like that movie. I think Insomnia is better. I got Insomnia at 9, 10 at 11, then following at 12.
Oh, one other thing I wanted to bring up. I feel like this movie was so profoundly Oscar snubbed. Profoundly.
I didn't look into that. I didn't look into that.
Yeah, so it was nominated for original score, production design, sound editing, and sound mixing. So 4 right there. It won for visual effects. So there's 5 noms total, wins for one of them. Doesn't even get a nom for Best Picture or Director or Best Actor, which I think is wild. For Best Director, it was Birdman, Boyhood, Foxcatcher, The Grand Budapest Hotel, and The Imitation Game, which honestly, pretty crazy year. Pretty fucking good year, especially at Best Picture. But, and I love a lot of those movies. You could cut Imitation Game, which I really like Imitation Game. I think a lot of people clown on that movie. I think it's pretty underrated. This movie is much better than Imitation Game, in my opinion. I think you could cut Foxcatcher too. I haven't seen Birdman, but fuck it, cut Birdman because I really like.
Birdman's good. No, Birdman's pretty good.
Okay, but again, I think that there's 2 items on that list that easily could have been cut. Okay, now for Best Picture, this is way more damning. So, Birdman, American Sniper. I think this is a better movie than American Sniper, although I do like that movie. Boyhood again, Grand Budapest, which I love. Imitation Game, again, could have been there. Selma, The Theory of Everything, and Whiplash this year. God.
So, I mean, I could take out Theory of Everything and Imitation Game.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's tough. That's actually, it's not as good of a year. I mean, it's okay. It's like, but there's nothing like really stands out to me in that list.
Oh, I think Grand Budapest Hotel and Whiplash are both excellent.
Those 2. Yeah, that's fair. Whiplash is a 5-star for me. We got to talk about that another day.
Yeah. I just saw that in theaters a couple months ago for its 10-year anniversary as well. And then for Best Actor, Eddie Redmayne won for Theory of Everything. Steve Carell in Foxcatcher, Bradley Cooper in American Sniper, Benedict Cumberbatch for The Imitation Game, and then Michael Keaton for Birdman. Again, I think I'd cut Cumberbatch for McConaughey in this. I think McConaughey's incredible what he's doing in some of these scenes.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I agree.
That is some recency bias as well.
I'm gonna do you one solid on this. You know what? As we talked about this, I'm moving Interstellar up 1 space over Batman Begins. I think it is better than Batman Begins. As I read that, I realized it. I think Dark Knight Rises is still better. I think Bane is still better.
You think Dark Knight Rises is better?
Dude, Dark Knight Rises is really good.
Oh my god. Read a book. Educate yourself. I can't believe this.
Read a Kip Thornton book or what is his name?
Well, okay, also, before we start wrapping up, you did say you had one more hottest take. It was about the United Health CEO shooter. What were you going to say? I can't remember what you were going to say.
Oh, yeah, it was about... No, I don't have one.
It was something really profound, really hot take.
Yeah, I think Bane did it.
All right, you heard it here first.
No, they caught the guy today.
Luigi?
Yeah. I don't have much more on that. I actually have nothing on that. I didn't even have a good joke to throw in there. I had literally nothing.
All right, so closing thoughts. For me, I mean genre, it's a sci-fi. This is true blue sci-fi. With a little bit of a grounded slant to it. And it was a 5 out of 5 for me. I wrestled with it. I agreed with you, John, there's definitely some things I had issues with on it. But when I was really thinking about it, I was like, God, this is so moving. It's so inspiring. I watch it so infrequently, but every time I do, I find it to be like one of the most inspiring 2 hours of the last couple years for me. Like it just means a lot to me. I love sci-fi in general, and I think this is like one of my favorite versions of it. So even with a couple areas that I think could have been better or were a little clunky, I think the highs make up for those little misgivings.
I think that's great. I mean, I like when people like this movie. I think this is a movie that could be anywhere on anybody's list. I truly do think that. I know we're joking about it, but like it with Nolan, it just comes down to personal preference, I think. And like I'll argue with someone who says Prestige is his best movie, but this one I get that. I think this is definitely in the conversation.
Love it. All right, what's your score, John?
4 out of 5.
Okay, I gotta go. I'm gonna head out.
Hey, but now it's number 7. Number 7 on the.
I'm gonna do you a favor. I'm moving it over Batman Begins.
I'll rewatch Dark Knight Rises this weekend, and maybe it'll jump up another one.
Think about it. Yeah, just make sure you watch it in 4 sittings.
Well, that one is long. All right, man.
All right. Well, we do have to say. So we took last week off for the holidays, but next week we are going to be going over Robert Eggers' first 3 films in preparation for Nosferatu, which comes out on Christmas. So the first 3 movies are The Witch, The Lighthouse, and The Northman. So we'll be doing some discussion of that. John, anything else you want to add before we go?
No, I'm excited about that one. So looking forward to talking to you about it.
Yeah, and we've been getting a lot of comments on the page. So I know we normally say if you have anything you want, just please add a comment. I would say this time hold off, because I'm sure some people won't hear this part and they're just going to add a comment. So we don't want to clog up the channel too much. But feel free to.
You know what Spotify tells you, which is great. They have a stat called impressions, which basically just means the amount of people who saw our video and didn't click on it. But we have 450 impressions.
Okay.
It showed up on people's feeds 450
wow.
times.
All right.
And they scrolled on by.
Do we have any listens?
Yeah, we got some listens. I think it's just our girlfriends.
Damn, that's tough. You know, at least we've got girlfriends.
That's true.
There's a lot of movie pods where they don't even have girlfriends. That's what I'm hearing.
True. I've heard that too.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. And we will be back next week. Later, John.
Later, man.